Why don't you just move on? My family said after years of ignoring me. When I finally left without warning, they blew up my phone with messages. I didn't answer. I was busy building a life without them. Growing up in the Miller house meant living under a microscope. Every choice, every mistake, every moment of joy was picked apart, criticized, repackaged into something I was supposed to be ashamed of. Michael, you can't wear that to school. What will people think? Michael, why are you wasting your time on drawing? You need to focus on something practical. Michael, why can't you be more like your cousin Jason? It was a steady drip of control, not a flood. Little things that eroded the person I was trying to become until, by the time I hit my late 20s, I barely recognized myself anymore. I was working a dead-end job at a logistics company, living in a 2-bedroom house my parents technically still owned, dating people who fit the mold, rather than who actually made me happy. Every Sunday was mandatory family dinner. Every decision, from where I lived to what car I drove, was somehow a family decision. And I was dying inside. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was raining. I remember that clearly. I'd gotten home late, stuck covering for a coworker, and Mom was waiting, arms crossed, in the kitchen. "You missed dinner," she said, like I'd committed a felony. "I had to work," I said, dumping my silk jacket onto a chair. "You always have an excuse." I didn't argue. I was too tired. She followed me down the hallway, picking at me the entire way. "We sacrificed so much for you. The least you could do is show up. You don't even care about this family. No wonder you're still single." Something inside me, something small and fragile, snapped. I locked myself in my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor for a long time. And then I opened my laptop. Delta Airlines. One-way ticket. Portland, Oregon. I'd never even been there. I just knew it was about as far from the Miller house as I could get without needing a passport. The ticket cost more than I was comfortable spending. I booked it anyway. Flight date, 2 weeks from that night. I told no one. Over the next 14 days, I packed what little I cared about, some clothes, my sketchbooks, a few worn novels, and sold the rest. I found a studio apartment online, tiny, cheap, no frills. I wired a deposit. Done. The night before I left, I sat through one final family dinner. Mom complained about my job. Dad grunted disapproval about millennials. My sister, Jessica, made passive-aggressive comments about how some people just couldn't get their lives together. I smiled through it all, because in less than 24 hours, I'd be free. When the morning came, I left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm leaving. I love you, but I can't live my life for you anymore." And then I walked out the door. No big scene. No dramatic confrontation. Just me, my backpack, and the rising sun. At the airport, I sat at the gate with my heart hammering in my chest. Part of me expected to see Dad storming through security, Mom weeping dramatically, Jessica sneering. But they didn't come. The plane boarded. I found my seat, buckled in, and as the engines roared to life and the runway blurred past the window, I felt something strange and beautiful. Relief. I didn't know what was waiting for me in Portland. I just knew it had to be better than the life I was leaving behind. The first thing I noticed when I landed in Portland was the smell. Wet asphalt, pine trees, and the faint, clean bite of cold air. I had never been here before, but somehow it already felt more like home than the house I'd left behind. My studio apartment was exactly what the listing promised. Tiny, drafty, and barely big enough for my backpack and dreams. The ceiling fan rattled when it spun. The fridge hummed so loudly it sounded like it might take off. But it was mine. No passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. No questions about where I'd been or why I hadn't called. For the first few days, I existed in a kind of stunned silence. I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford a car. $8 store ramen and canned soup. Watched the rain blur the city lights through my dusty window. It was lonely, sure. Terrifying sometimes. But it was freeing too. Every choice I made was mine alone. Finding a job turned out to be harder than I thought. My resume was a patchwork of jobs I'd taken to make my parents happy. Warehouse assistant, retail clerk, office admin. Nothing that screamed, Portland hip. I pounded the pavement anyway, dropping off applications at cafes, bookstores, anywhere with the help wanted sign. 3 weeks in, the money I'd brought was almost gone. I was down to rationing peanut butter sandwiches when I got a call from a little independent bookstore, Cedar and Sage, tucked away between a coffee shop and a tattoo parlor. The owner, a woman named Valerie, was maybe in her mid-50s, with wild gray hair and a permanent smudge of ink on her fingers. She glanced at my resume, shrugged, and said, Can you lift boxes and not be an asshole to customers? I can do that, I promised. Good enough. You start Monday. I almost cried right there on the spot. The work wasn't glamorous. It involved a lot of unloading shipments, alphabetizing books, and pretending not to eavesdrop on the intense conversations people had in the philosophy section. But I loved it. Every battered spine and coffee-stained page felt like a tiny rebellion against the version of myself I'd been forced to be. Valerie paid under the table at first, cash tucked into a battered envelope every Friday afternoon. It wasn't much, but it kept the lights on and the tiny fridge stocked with real groceries. Slowly, painfully, I started building a new life. I found a second-hand bike at a yard sale and learned to navigate the city's endless bike lanes. I discovered which cafes had free Wi-Fi and cheap refills. I figured out that Powell's bookstore was a dangerous place for someone trying to save money. Most importantly, I started drawing again. I hadn't picked up a pencil seriously since high school. Every time I tried before, my mother's voice had echoed in my head. Art is a hobby, not a future. But now, alone in that little studio, I let the pencil move the way it wanted. Pages filled with cityscapes, rainy streets, strangers' faces glimpsed through coffee shop windows. It wasn't easy. Some nights, the loneliness hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd scroll through social media and see pictures of old classmates with their perfect weddings, their mortgages, their smiling families. I'd wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd wonder if I'd been selfish. But then I'd remind myself, this loneliness was mine, not forced on me, not used as a weapon to shame me into obedience. It was the price of freedom, and for the first time in my life, I was willing to pay it. The first real test came about 6 months after I arrived. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was shelving new arrivals when Valerie called me into the back office. "You got a visitor," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Looks serious." My heart slammed against my ribs. For a split second, I thought maybe it was Mom, that she'd tracked me down, ready to drag me home by the ear. But when I stepped into the dusty little office, it wasn't Mom. It was Jessica, my sister. She looked out of place here, in her crisp blazer and manicured nails. She perched awkwardly on the cracked vinyl chair, clutching a designer handbag like it might protect her. "Michael," she said, standing up. "Jessica," I replied, my voice flat. We stared at each other for a long, uncomfortable moment. Finally, she blurted out, "You need to come home." I almost laughed. Almost. "I don't need anything," I said. Her mouth tightened. "Mom's sick." I crossed my arms. "What kind of sick?" "Stress," she said after a pause. "Anxiety. Depression. She cries all the time. Dad's worried sick. You can't leave like this. It's tearing the family apart." There it was. Not actual illness. Guilt. Manipulation wrapped up in concern. "You didn't come here because you miss me," I said slowly. "You came because you want me back in the role you're comfortable with." "That's not fair," Jessica snapped. "You abandoned us." "No," I said. "I abandoned a version of me you all tried to control." Her eyes flashed. "You're being selfish." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe for the first time in my life, I'm being honest." Jessica stood up, smoothing down her blazer. "Think about what you're doing," she said, voice trembling with anger. "Think about what it means for Mom, for Dad, for all of us." "I have," I said quietly. And with that, she walked out, the door jingling behind her. I stood there for a long time after she left, the smell of old paper and coffee wrapping around me like armor. Valerie poked her head in. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Family," she guessed. "Yeah. You get to choose who you call family, you know," she said, disappearing again into the shelves. I sat down at the old wooden desk and stared at the mess Jessica had stirred up inside me. It would have been so easy to give in, to pack a bag, to apologize for wanting a life of my own, to slip back into the old patterns. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up my pencil and drew. Rain slanting across the bookstore windows. A figure walking away into the mist, head held high. A new beginning. One I chose for myself. In the weeks after Jessica's visit, something inside me shifted. It wasn't immediate. Healing never is. But there was a moment, a quiet Saturday afternoon, where I caught myself laughing, genuinely laughing, over a stupid YouTube video a customer had recommended at the bookstore. And I realized it had been months since I'd felt that light. Freedom wasn't just surviving anymore. It was beginning to feel like living. Cedar and Sage became more than a job. It became a home. Valerie taught me everything she knew. How to manage inventory, how to host author readings, how to recommend books based not just on what people said they liked, but what they needed without knowing it. She had a sixth sense for that. "You listen first," she told me once as we restocked the poetry section. "People will tell you what their soul's starving for if you just shut up long enough." I listened, and I started seeing people, really seeing them. Lonely teenagers, clinging to fantasy novels. Elderly men buying mystery thrillers and pretending it was for their nieces. Young women shyly asking if we carried books on starting over after bad breakups. Somewhere between those paperbacks and conversations, I realized I wasn't alone. Everyone was carrying something heavy. Everyone was looking for something. One rainy Thursday, a woman came in, maybe mid-30s, soaked to the bone, mascara running. She wandered the aisles aimlessly for a while before collapsing into a chair near the front window. I approached carefully, holding a towel from behind the counter. "Here," I said. She blinked up at me, stunned, then laughed a watery, broken sound, and took it. "Thanks," she said. "Rough day." I nodded. "I get it." We didn't speak much more, but before she left, she bought a battered second-hand copy of The Alchemist and said, "I think I was supposed to find this today." Watching her walk out into the drizzle, book clutched against her chest like a lifeline, I realized something else. Sometimes you save yourself by helping others find their way too. By the time summer rolled around, I had built something resembling a life. A job I didn't dread waking up for. A tiny circle of real friends. People who didn't know the old me and didn't expect me to apologize for becoming new. Even a small art show at a local coffee shop, where I nervously pinned up my drawings of rainy Portland streets and busy cafe scenes. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. My parents emailed once. Just once. A short, clipped message from Mom's account. "We miss you. Come home." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the expectation that I would fold, return, pretend none of it happened. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my sketchbook and drew the view from my window. Sunlight slanting across the rooftops. A bird perched on a rusted antenna. The faint glimmer of the river beyond. Freedom in ink. My freedom. And then came Lena. I wasn't looking for her. I wasn't looking for anyone, honestly. I was still learning to love the sound of my own breathing. But one Saturday, I walked into the cafe next to the bookstore for my usual post-shift coffee. And there she was, arguing passionately with the barista about how they should absolutely add a cardamom latte to the menu. I ordered my regular black coffee and sat at the window, sketching absent-mindedly. A few minutes later, she dropped into the chair across from me, holding out her hand. "I'm Lena," she said, grinning. "You look like someone who knows things." I blinked. "Depends on the thing." "Best place for pie within walking distance." I smiled before I could stop myself. 3 blocks east. Corner of Ash and 10th. Tiny place called Marigolds. She beamed like I'd given her the winning lottery numbers. "You're my hero," she declared. And before I could even process what was happening, she grabbed her coffee and bounced out the door. I thought that was it. Just a random, funny encounter. But a week later, she was back. And the week after that. And before long, it became a pattern. Lena, showing up after my shifts, telling me about her latest adventures in culinary school, dragging me to food carts and open mic nights, filling the quiet spaces in my life with laughter and chaos. She didn't pry. She didn't ask why I flinched sometimes when my phone buzzed. She just accepted me. And slowly, I learned to let her. One night, we sat on the curb outside Cedar and Sage, eating greasy fries from a paper bag and watching the rain mist over the streetlights. You ever feel like you spent your whole life playing a role you didn't audition for? I asked, not even meaning to. Lena leaned back on her elbows, looking up at the cloudy sky. "Yeah," she said, "but you know the cool thing about life." "What?" "You can fire the director and write your own damn script anytime you want." I laughed, not because it was particularly profound, but because it was true. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I found the ticket stub for my flight to Portland, still tucked in the back of my sketchbook. One way, no return, and for the first time, instead of feeling like I'd escaped something, I realized I'd arrived. By fall, Portland had settled into its rainy season. It wasn't the dramatic thunderstorms of the East Coast. Here, the rain was gentler, more persistent, a quiet tapping on windows, a steady mist that turned every street into a watercolor painting. I loved it. Life had finally taken on a rhythm that felt natural. Work at the bookstore, sketching sessions at my favorite coffee shop, long walks with Lena, where we talked about everything and nothing. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. But the past has a way of tracking you down, no matter how far you run. It started with a letter. I found it tucked between the bills one Thursday evening. A thick envelope. No return address. My full name written in my father's heavy, blocky handwriting. My stomach twisted. I knew I shouldn't open it, that no good ever came sealed in envelopes from people who thought love was control. But curiosity, that old, dangerous itch, got the better of me. Inside, a 5-page letter from my father. It wasn't an apology. It was a list. A list of everything I'd taken from the family by leaving. How my absence had broken Mom's heart. How Jessica was struggling without her big brother's example. How Dad had to start doing house repairs himself now. How I'd ruined Christmas, Thanksgiving, even the 4th of July. And then, at the bottom, you can still come home. We'll find you a job. Set you back on the right path. You just need to admit you were wrong. Admit I was wrong. My hand shook with fury. I wasn't wrong for wanting a life of my own. I wasn't wrong for refusing to be a puppet on their strings. I shoved the letter deep into the trash, underneath soggy coffee grounds and torn grocery ads, where it belonged. But it sat heavy on my chest for days. Lena noticed, of course. We were sitting on the rooftop of her apartment one evening, sharing a cheap bottle of wine, the city lights glittering below us. "You're quiet tonight," she said, kicking her feet over the edge of the building. I hesitated. "It's my dad," I said finally. "He wants me to come back. Pretend none of this ever happened." Lena was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "If you went back, who would you be doing it for? Him or you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Still, the doubt gnawed at me. I thought about all the birthdays I'd missed, the family barbecues, the little moments that stitched a life together. Was I being stubborn? Selfish? What if they really had changed? The next morning, against every instinct, I found myself sitting in a cafe, typing out a cautious email. "Hope you're well. Maybe we could talk on the phone sometime, just to catch up." I hovered over the send button for a long time, and then I closed the laptop, because I realized I didn't want to catch up. I didn't want to pretend the past hadn't happened. I didn't want to shrink myself down again just to fit into their broken version of family. I wanted my life, my real one, and that meant closing some doors, permanently. A few weeks later, Lena's culinary school held a graduation showcase. She invited me, beaming with pride. I stood in a crowded auditorium, clapping and cheering as she walked across the stage to accept her certificate, the biggest grin I'd ever seen plastered across her face. Afterwards, she dragged me outside into the rain, her cap askew, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You came," she said, laughing. "Of course I came," I said. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." And I meant it, because she had become my family too. Not through obligation, through choice, through love, through the quiet, everyday decision to show up. That night, back in my apartment, I pulled out my sketchbook. I drew the bookstore, warm light spilling onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. I drew Lena, laughing, arms wide open to the sky. I drew myself, standing tall, standing free, not waiting for permission, not waiting for forgiveness, just living. I didn't hear from my parents again, not directly anyway. Every so often, a mutual friend from my hometown would message me. "Your mom mentioned you in church today. Your dad told people you're still finding yourself out west." Always the same tone, pity mixed with judgment, but it didn't touch me anymore. Their opinions were heavy, and I had laid them down at last. I was lighter without them. One cold December morning, Lena and I stood on a bluff overlooking the river, bundled up in scarves and coats, sipping cheap coffee from a food cart. "What's next for you?" she asked, nudging me. I smiled. "More," I said. "More drawing, more living, maybe even more dreaming." "Dream big," she said. "You earned it." And standing there, watching the sun break through the clouds, I finally believed her. Because freedom isn't just leaving behind what hurts you. It's building something better in its place. And I was just getting started. By the time the new year rolled around, I barely recognized the person I'd been when I first landed in Portland. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Cedar and Sage offered me a promotion, part-time manager, and with Valerie's encouragement, I started running the shop's new art in the community program, hosting free drawing classes every Saturday morning. The classes were chaotic, messy, wonderful. Kids with sticky fingers, smearing pastels across the page. Teenagers too cool to admit they cared, secretly perfecting every line. Adults who hadn't picked up a pencil in 30 years rediscovering the simple joy of making something with their own two hands. Watching their faces light up reminded me why I'd loved art in the first place. It wasn't about being good. It was about being free. Meanwhile, Lena was building her own dream. After graduation, she landed a job as a pastry chef at a trendy little cafe downtown. She worked insane hours, came home covered in flour, and loved every second of it. Some nights, we stayed up late in her tiny kitchen, testing out her latest experiments: lavender scones, cardamom buns, something she called death by dark chocolate tart, that almost made me propose on the spot. We weren't rushing anything. No labels, no pressure. Just two people who'd found something rare and precious: home in each other. One evening, after a particularly successful Saturday art class, Valerie pulled me aside. "You ever think about showing your work?" she asked casually, flipping through the sketches I kept meaning to organize. I laughed. "Show it to who? My mom still thinks drawing is a waste of time." Valerie just shrugged. "Your mom doesn't live here. You do." The word stuck with me. A week later, Lena and I sat in our favorite coffee shop, the one where we first met, poring over the submission form for a local art fair. "It's just one table," I said, heart hammering. "Probably nobody will even stop by." "So what?" Lena said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Do it for you." So I did. I spent nights hunched over my tiny desk, framing sketches, printing labels, practicing talking about my work out loud, without wanting to crawl under the nearest table. And when the day of the fair came, something incredible happened. People stopped. People smiled. People bought. Not just friends out of pity. Strangers. People who saw something in my messy little drawings that made them pause, reach into their wallets, and carry a piece of my heart home with them. I made enough that day to cover a month's rent, and enough to cover something even more important: belief. Belief that maybe, just maybe, my dreams weren't stupid after all. After the fair, things moved fast. Valerie offered me a wall in cedar and sage to display my work full-time. Lena convinced her boss to carry prints at the cafe. A local newspaper did a tiny write-up on the bookstore, mentioned the art classes, and my name. Small things. But they built, one brick at a time. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think even bigger. One chilly evening, walking home with Lena, I said it out loud. "I think I want to open a studio someday." She grinned, looping her arm through mine. "Then you will." Simple as that. No disbelief. No list of reasons why I couldn't. Just faith. The kind I'd spent my whole life giving to others, and finally learned to give to myself. But of course, life wasn't all neat lines and smooth paths. About 3 months after the art fair, I got another message from home. Not a letter this time. An email. Short. Blunt. "Your father had a heart attack. He's asking for you." No hello. No how are you. Just an obligation wrapped in urgency. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling that old, sick knot tightening in my stomach. Guilt. Duty. Fear. Was this it? The moment I was supposed to forgive everything? Pack a bag. Rush home. Be the good son they thought I'd betrayed. I didn't answer right away. I went for a long walk instead, letting the cold air whip against my cheeks. I thought about my father, his booming voice, his endless disapproval, his way of turning every kindness into a transaction. I thought about the little boy I'd been, desperate for a pat on the head that never came. I thought about the man I was now, standing taller, breathing deeper, living freer. And I realized something simple and devastating. I didn't owe them my life. Not anymore. That night, sitting on the floor of my apartment, sketchbook balanced on my knees, I typed a reply. "I'm sorry to hear about Dad. I hope he recovers well. I am building a life here that I can't leave behind. Please respect my decision." I hit send, closed the laptop, and let myself cry. Not out of guilt, but out of grief for the years I'd spent trying to earn love that was always conditional. 2 weeks later, I got a follow-up email. "Your father is doing fine. Jessica said it's a miracle. He keeps asking when you're coming home." I didn't reply, because I was already home. Freedom isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 tiny choices. It's staying when it would be easier to run. It's speaking when it would be easier to stay silent. It's choosing your own voice, your own dreams, your own life, over and over again. It took almost 2 years, but I finally saved enough to open my own art studio. A tiny storefront on a quiet street, sandwiched between a yoga studio and a bakery that smelled like heaven every morning. The windows were cracked and the floorboards creaked, but the first time I walked inside, I could see it. Sunlight spilling across blank walls. The hum of people creating something beautiful just for the sake of it. Freedom made real. The day I signed the lease, Lena dragged me outside, threw her arms around my neck, and whooped loud enough to startle half the street. "You did it," she said, laughing into my jacket. "We did it," I corrected, because it wasn't just me. It was every late night we'd spent dreaming and planning. Every morning she'd slid a cup of coffee across the counter, while I mapped out budgets and sketched logo ideas on napkins. It was us, building something together. Opening the studio wasn't easy. Money was tight. The first few months, there were more empty classes than full ones. Some days I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I should have stayed safe or smaller. But then a kid would come in, a shy teenager with a sketchpad tucked under their jacket, and leave 2 hours later with stars in their eyes. Or an exhausted mother would bring her 6-year-old to a Saturday painting session and say afterward, "Thank you." She hasn't smiled like that in months. And I'd remember. I didn't escape my old life, just to survive. I escaped so I could live. And living meant fighting for joy, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. About a year after opening the studio, Lena and I stood in the doorway late one night, sipping wine from plastic cups and watching the fairy lights we'd strung up across the ceiling flicker against the windows. "You ever think about what life would have been like if you'd stayed?" she asked softly. I thought about it. I thought about the endless family dinners, the lectures about responsibility, the weight of living someone else's version of a good life. I thought about the numbness, the smallness, and then I looked around, at the shelves crammed with art supplies, the bulletin board overflowing with kids' doodles and thank you notes, the messy tables, the half-finished canvases, the life buzzing through the air even in the dead of night. And I said, "Yeah, I think about it, and I'm grateful every day that I didn't." She smiled, resting her head against my shoulder. Sometimes I still got letters from home. Not many. A Christmas card signed Love, Mom and Dad, with no personal note. An occasional forwarded invitation to Jessica's baby showers and anniversaries. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Just because I didn't need to. That life wasn't mine anymore. And that grief, the grief of letting go, had long since turned into something softer. A scar, not a wound. Proof that I had healed. One evening, after a particularly packed art class, I sat at my desk, flipping through old sketchbooks. I found one from my first year in Portland, rough, smudged, the lines shaky and uncertain. There was a self-portrait on the last page. A man standing in the rain, his face turned up toward a sky just starting to clear. Hope. Even then, before the studio, before Lena, before everything, hope had been there, waiting, growing, and now it had bloomed into a life I wouldn't trade for anything. Not long after, Lena and I found out we were expecting a baby, a tiny, brand new life. The thought terrified me at first. What if I messed it up? What if I became everything I tried to escape? Lena caught me spiraling one night and took my hands in hers. "You're not your parents," she said firmly. "You're you, and you're already more than enough." And deep down, I knew she was right, because I'd already made the hardest choice once, to walk away from everything that broke me. And I would keep making it every day. Choosing love over fear. Choosing freedom over guilt. Choosing to be the man I had fought so hard to become. When our daughter was born, a fierce, wailing little miracle, I held her close and whispered the same promise I'd made to myself all those years ago. "You don't have to earn love. You just have it." And as I watched the sunrise spill through the hospital window, painting the room in gold and pink and new beginnings, I realized the boy who had once bought a one-way ticket out of town had done more than just run. He had built a life. A good one. A brave one. A free one. And he wasn't going back. Not ever.